Firstly, I'd like to thank the Transatlantic Migrant Democracy Dialogue for organising this and having this summit this year of Democracy Summit 2020. I'd like to thank the Immigrant Council of Ireland, Theresa especially, and Brian and the team for always fighting for immigrants' rights in Ireland. And it's great to hear Congressman Garcia's words there, because I think a lot of us on this call would be able to relate to what he says in terms of representing our communities and feeling like outsiders sometimes. So I wanted to base on my keynote on kind of more my personal experience and where I'm coming from, and also why I think diversity in politics is important. So my parents would have come to Ireland in the 70s. They met over here. They were from Hong Kong. So I would have been a second generation here. And for me growing up, there was no one that looked like me at all in politics. There was actually no one that really had any other different skin color in politics. So it was quite hard to imagine myself or anyone I know within politics, within the political sphere. And this is why the phrase that I hold very dear to my heart is that you can't be what you can't see. So, and this comes to my end point when we discuss kind of political diversity. It's why it's so important, because there are many people, especially young people, these days, that will look at their political representatives and ask the question of, do they really represent me? Do they represent who I am, what I look like, my culture? Do they represent my politics, my community? And all these are really important questions. When I grew up, I guess, there were as I said, there was no one that kind of looked like me or my family. And I also, coming from a working class background, I didn't really have the time or knowledge to think about politics. My parents were both immigrants that didn't speak any English at all. So politics would have been the last thing on their mind. They wouldn't have thought about it. They wouldn't have, I guess, in a way, thought that it would affect them. So it wasn't until I was in college that I really thought about political representation. I studied history and politics in UCD in college here, and it was really when I started delving into kind of political history and the importance of it that I started realizing, well, you know, our country's freedoms are hard earned and hard fought, and that is what each citizen needs to do if they want to represent. They need to take up the fight of making sure that they fight against social injustice, making sure that they fight against issues. So it was then I started taking an interest. But then as my 20s and having debt and bills and college fees to pay off, I put it in the back of my head. And it wasn't until my early 30s that I really started thinking about what country do I want to live in? How do I represent it? How do I get involved? A larger part of it was due to my other half wanting to run in local politics, and I managed his campaign. And then as I managed his campaign, I started getting involved in the political party, the Green Party in the background. I am now the chairperson of the Green Party, which is a party in government at the moment. And for me, it was understanding how the party worked, understanding what we needed to do in terms of party organization. But then that also gave me some scope of understanding the political space. Because I'll be honest, I wasn't very confident in going into politics, mainly because, well, not at the beginning, because again, it was the kind of childhood kind of fear of there's no one or that looks like me. What if people won't support me? What if people don't want anything to do with me? What if people don't think I represent their interests? So what if people don't think I'm good enough? So all those questions came in mind. So when I ran, when I finally decided to run, I didn't actually think I'd get anywhere. But as Teresa pointed out there, I made a little bit of history. I became the highest percentage vote of any first-time candidate in the history, in the local electoral history of Ireland. So I managed to come out with a double quota at the end, and that was last May when, and this is the thing, talking about it, it sounds like I'm boasting, but it's not. It was the numbers. I was completely shocked on the day of the count when someone had said to me, you should have had a running mate with you. And then as the year went by, I ran to be the chairperson of the party. I became the chairperson of the party. We then went into negotiations to go into government. I was part of those teams. And then when it came to the Lord Mayor, I put my name in to become Lord Mayor of Dublin, and I got voted in, which was surprising, but also a wonderful feeling. Now, everyone always goes, "Oh, that means like bam, bam, bam. You've always had successes. You don't have failures." I threw my name in to be a senator, and I didn't even get a glance. And that's the thing. My recommendation to anyone going into politics will be always try and keep on trying, because you will not always succeed, and it will always be a road that's marred with ups and downs, and you have to have massively tough skin. From my experience of being in politics, from the background and even in the foreground, there has been massive amounts of abuse in different forms, but then there's been massive amounts of support. So I think my vote share shows that there's people want diversity and want change, but equally, when you see some of the abuse that my office here gets for me, you will see that there are a lot of people who are not willing or not wanting to see a change as well. And that's what we're fighting against. So to Congressman Garcia's point, you see it in the States. We see it closer to home in the UK. There is a issue of polarization in the world when it comes to politics. It's one extreme versus the other extreme. The centrist happens to be slowly fading away, and it becomes quite a dangerous space, mainly because we need to have as much diversity as possible to make sure that we draw it back to the center, to make sure that people understand representation and diversity is good. And this leads me to the point of, even though it's really hard to be a public representative, and even though the road is very hard as well, the reward is great, because you're not doing it for just yourself. You're doing it for the generations after you. Like for me, I cheesy as it sounds, I would always say I'm doing it for my daughter, because like when she looks in the mirror in 10 years time, she's only 3 right now, or 2.5 going on 3. But when she looks in the mirror in 10 years time or in 20 years time, I want her to know that any person, no matter of background, skin color, abilities, religion, gender, can be a political representative and can be what they want to be. And this is a future. I think that's why it's so important that we continue conversations like these, and why we keep on needing to push diversity, no matter how hard it is. Ireland's diversity in political space is not good at all. So because everyone looks at me and go, "Oh, great, there's diversity there," but I don't want to be. I don't mind being the first, but I don't want to be the last. There has to be others that are after me, and within the political space that we champion in relation to diversity. So that's why having, again, conversations like these are very encouraging, because it shows that there's a will there. It shows that there can be a momentum there. And I guess my ask to everyone here is continue these conversations, continue to push it as far as you can. And no matter how hard it becomes and how many failures there are along the way, there will always be success as well. And that takes time, and I'm happy to support whoever has any questions, or if there's anything that I can help with. So thank you.
when you were elected a couple of months ago, it was a great joy for all migrant communities. Like, I opened a bottle of wine, and it was like Wednesday or something. I can't remember, middle of the week, because I was so happy. But as I've mentioned in my introduction, you are much more than just a politician of a migrant background. And when I watch your work and your activities, it's very evident that you want to be politicians for everyone. Was it difficult for you to carve this out from your role? Because like looking at myself, I'm seen only as an expert of migration, right? And people sometimes are surprised that I might have opinion about something else than migration. And I was wondering whether you were also facing something like that in your career, and was it difficult to steer away from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I put on mute there while I'm not speaking. So I like the bits about my background I didn't mention is I'm a qualified barrister, and I also head the communications function in one of the biggest multinationals in the world. I was head of function in Diageo for crisis communication. So my background is covering, like, it has been always jack of all trades, covering different areas. But somehow, and even in politics, nowadays, within months of me taking the role, the first thing I did was set up a homeless task force to look at homelessness. And then I looked at supporting maternity rights and also issues with women. And I also championed kind of livable city. Now, discrimination and issues with discrimination was one of my pillars, but it became somehow to everyone the main talking point. So anytime there was a discrimination issue, people would go ask Hazel, or whenever I did interviews, or whenever it would be one of the first questions would be about racial abuse. Now, that's the thing. I get why they ask, and I also appreciate the topic being brought up, because we do need to talk about it. But ultimately, to your point, it becomes kind of interesting that you are then pigeonholed as just like talking about the subject, because I am a person of an ethnic minority. Then immediately people will go, well, she's the Chinese mayor, or she's the person that will talk about that topic. Whereas we need to be, and it's an added bar. Like, there are many barriers to people going into politics from diverse backgrounds, but that is another added extra barrier, because you want to represent diversity, but you don't want to be that's the only thing you represent, and you don't want people to start thinking that's the only thing you are, because that will be, in a way, the legacy you leave, and also what features in their mind first time. So that's why you end up having to work doubly as hard to make sure you prove yourself. And it's been like that in this job and every other job I've had as well. So it's not new, but it's unfortunate, but it is what we have to face.
Thank you. So we have a question here from a participant, Asa, and she's asking, what convinced you concretely to stop supporting someone else's campaign and start your own? What was a particular reason for you to run your own campaign?
I didn't stop participating in his campaign. He's my other half. He's my fiance. So I ran his campaign, and I made sure he topped the poll before I decided to even run my own campaign. And this is the thing: he was a unknown candidate, and we ran his campaign and we topped the poll and made a little bit of history there as well. And then that was when I decided, I'm good at this. I'm good at running campaigns. And then there was then the decision of, well, will I decide to run my own? So it wasn't a case that I left him out to on the road and went, oh, right, I'll run my own. It was, so the election cycles here are that there's local elections every 5 years. And there's a general election every time a government falls, or after 5 years as well. There's a time limit for governments and general elections too. So for Patrick, he ran in 2014 and I ran his campaign. And then by 2019, he was running again. And that was when I decided I would run. And I ended up managing his campaign and my campaign as well. And yes, he did manage to top the poll yet again. So we ran two campaigns. I ran two campaigns, and we managed to do very well out of the two campaigns. And then 9 months, 8 months later, I ran his general election campaign. So, which is the campaign to become a TD.
What is your vision of Ireland in 10 years?
My vision in Ireland would be that we have, well, first and foremost, since we're talking about diversity here, is that we need to have representation across all communities within political sphere. So that would be my first step. But my vision would be a sustainable, inclusive Ireland. It's two very simple points. Sustainable is, well, how do we build a sustainable community? How do we build sustainable communities? And to build that, we need to make sure that we have integration across the board. So we have communities that actually work, but in terms of inclusive in politics, that inclusivity, that's very simple. That ties into the integration element of how do communities work? How do people interact with each other? How do we make sure that the proper conversations are being had? So, and that then filters into our political space as well. How do we make sure that there's proper representation across the board? Like I look at representation from minority backgrounds, and it's very poor. But then you look at representation from on gender basis, and that's also very poor. Like we only have 21% of representatives in what we call the Oireachtas, which is a combination of Congress and Senate. So, and that's only 21% are female. In the council, there's only 22%. Out of 920 odd councillors, only 22% are women. And then when you delve down into another level in terms of minority, those numbers are even lower. So my vision for the future would be that we get to a space where we're in double digits for that representation.
Hi, Lord Mayor. This is Thomas Huddleston. I'm co-hosting today, and I'll just take over asking some of the questions that are coming forward. We had Robert from the Immigrant Council of Ireland saying that you often face a lot of online abuse on your social media, and it's pretty horrific. So it must be quite soul-crushing. How do you cope with it?
Oh, not well sometimes, if I'm being honest. Like, and this is the thing, I love to tell you that I just go, well, whatever, and ignore it. But there are times when it does destroy you. It like there have been times when my other half have come home and I am in floods of tears. But then equally, you then realize, you know what? It's part of the job. It shouldn't be part of the job. People shouldn't have to face abuse like that. But it's there, as in, I'm not saying it's part of the job insofar it's right to be there. It is. I'm saying it's part of the job, as in every politician I know, including my own fiance, who is male and who is white, gets a lot of abuse too. However, it has been proven that I am one of the top 2 most trolled politicians in Ireland over a certain period. The Irish Independent came out with that story not too long ago. And when you hear stats like that, you go, oh God. So, and it kind of, it makes you wonder whether it's worth it. And there are days that I kind of go, ugh, no, I just don't think it's worth it right now. And then there are days when I go, well, yeah, you know what? Well, feck them. So like, I like how I said FECK instead of the other word. So, but yeah, that's what I would recommend. But like, that's what I would suggest to people, that if you are facing abuse of any sort because of your skin color, background, gender, anything at all, that it takes some time to take some stock and know that it's not right. I know that you shouldn't be facing that. But then after, I always say, well, after my cry, I would just have to get on with it. And a lot of times I do get on with it. Other times I call people out because, and people always go, oh, why do you even give them the airtime or give them the opportunity? Well, because I'm not about to hide from them. If they have the audacity and the brazenness to come at me online or offline, then they can be damn sure that I'm going to make them understand they shouldn't be doing it. So, and this is why I tend to call it out whenever I do receive any abuse.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, for your strategies to cope and to fight back. We have a live question here from Simon Walls. So Simon, if you want to unmute yourself.
The situation she's facing is a very serious one. And I actually wanted to ask her, how has her communication and her interaction with key people in the society been over the years? I mean, government officials, other influential NGOs. How has she been moving along with them in terms of trying to get support from these kind of people, especially people who really support diversity and people from different backgrounds?
Okay, well, I guess my answer to that would be, when I first went into politics, I kind of went in from the background end, the management end of looking into political parties. And it wasn't until I moved to the forefront, more as a local rep, that I started connecting more into the various groups that you mentioned. So the NGOs, so the Immigrant Council being one of them, that has been so supportive of immigrants and anyone from a minority background. And I also linked in with the department because I was trying to push for hate crime legislation, and they are going through a consultation process for hate crime legislation, and I will continue to be pushing for that from my end anyway. So and then influential people, anyone I've met that is even slightly influential, I always tell them that Ireland is an amazing country insofar it's so warm and welcoming, and it's my home because I was born and raised here, but that there is a very loud and vocal minority when it comes to being abusive. And I would highlight then how them in their position should look at ways of how we celebrate diversity instead of attack it. And that's been my strategy so far. Of anyone I meet, I tell them. And also then in terms of the Department of Justice, I would be not quite, lobbying is not the right word, would be writing and communicating with them in terms of what is the overall strategy. On my own office, one of my as I said, one of my pillars is to fight discrimination. So I am working with the Social Inclusion Department, and we are working on a fit for purpose integration strategy for Dublin. And that this will, and it's something I hope to tie in with the Immigrant Council and the Department of Justice and Department of Integration on as well. It means that as Dublin as a whole would have integration strategy that works from the community all the way through. And that is something I'm working on to deliver in the next 4 months.
So I had a question actually a bit related to that, and then I'm going to ask Melis, one of our Helsinki co-hosts, to follow up with her question. I mean, you know, what we're trying to do in this Democracy Summit is look at how leaders can become community organizers, can become politically active, but also can become strategic communicators. And these are different sets of skills. You know, being able to go out and bring a community together around actions, being able to reach a hard to reach audience with a different message, and also to do just plain old politics. I mean, can you say a bit about what has been, what you used in your career and what you would recommend leaders to focus on?
I think the communication is a key. So it's like, as a strategy wise, I guess the question is what is best to do if you were trying to push yourself forward and put yourself as a rep. So the grassroots side is really important. As Simon pointed out there, that the grassroots communities are really important. So if all political systems are similar insofar when it comes to elections and when it comes to putting yourself out there as a rep, you have to be known on the ground. You have to make that effort on the ground, because at the end of the day, you may be the candidate that's coming from a diversity background, but you're representing everyone else. You are there to work for the community that you are representing. So whatever constituency that you're in. So for me, it involved making sure I was part of every group possible in the local area, that I was there for the community cleanups. I was there to help with any of the elderly community. I was there. So you're like, a lot of politicians, and this depends on what way people think politicians are. People might think politicians are just people who sit in whatever political house they're in and talk a lot and argue a lot, or you go back to what the fundamentals of being a public rep and a politician is. And for me, that was very simple. It was to represent the people that I was asking to elect me, and that involved being part of those groups, working hard in those communities. And that was first part of my strategy. And the second part of my strategy was, to your point on communication, how do I position myself out there so that they see me not just as the yellow skin candidate, but as a candidate that represents all of them. So, and that involved making sure that I dropped enough leaflets to tell my story, but tell also what was needed in the community. That involved making sure I was part of any discussions, the debates on a local level. And then I guess it also then, as you get into politics, it kind of transcends a little bit more then. So you go from then the community level to the national level, because a lot of people care what politicians think nationally as well. So you then end up moving from this discussion of, well, I will definitely make sure we have, make sure that the local GAA hall is fit for purpose for these groups. But on a national level, we want to make sure that we are fighting homelessness. So you have to make sure you think both ways as well. You think on all levels, on the kind of local level and more the national level.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. It's an honor to have you. My question is going to be a very good follow-up question to what you just replied, actually, or I hope it will be. But you mentioned about the polarization within societies and one extreme versus the other. What connects those two different groups among themselves is that they do have a shared history, a space, and a narrative. Yet the newcomers are referred to as the outsiders, and we are always the others. I was wondering if you have any suggestions on how to build a shared experience, history, narrative for us, for the newcomers, so we are not left outside of the political space.
So funny enough, the newcomers aren't always going to be new for long. So that's the first thing I would say. Like, politics, I always look at it as a long game. So you can get your immediate gains, but it will be a long game, and for me, I always look at it in 5 years, 10 years. So your newcomer that people talk about, they don't stay as a newcomer for long. You will be slowly back in the fold. But what makes it important to, as you say, how do you make sure you craft a space and craft a narrative that you can be part of? And I guess it's not so what the narrative is, but it's more so what kind of structures you need to put in place. And I had said this before to Teresa, I think a couple of weeks ago, that part of trying to combat the polarization is to make sure people are willing to talk. So there will be people in spaces that you may never want to go near, and you don't ever want to talk to because you just have completely different views from them. But there's a man that passed away recently that I find quite a hero, called John Humes, whose main push was always bring everyone to the table, no matter what views they've had, no matter what background they come from. So to your question of how do people who view people in the new space come along, well, you kind of shove yourself in there and you say, well, I'm part of this conversation now, or you become the facilitator and go, well, how do we become part of this conversation? And it's not necessarily sometimes a conversation people want to have, but it's one we have to have. And Obama was another one that did this over in the States during the White House conversations. He didn't have to do it. He managed to task the mayors of various cities and said, right, I want some open conversation that's about diversity, about issues, everything within various cities. And you have to bring both sides of the table to the table. And they were really uncomfortable conversations, but it meant that there was a way, as you said, to land that narrative for the people within seen as new or seen as unwanted or seen as any type of, I guess, outsider.
I just wondered, as a politician, how do you balance your own personal views and beliefs with that of the people who have elected you into office? Like, you have your own ideas and your own principles, I suppose, and sometimes what if that clashes with the people that you're representing? Is there sort of a way to gauge that and find maybe a middle ground? Or it's just a question I've always had and I still don't have an answer to.
And it's a tough one to have an answer to, because I went through years of my life, and I think I still go through a lot of my time as I'm always right. So, and other people are wrong. But then you slowly realize you're not always right, and that's a crushing realization when that happens. But it's a good realization to have, because back to that question from Melis about how conversations should be have and how do you position yourself, it goes with a territory. Then when you are a representative or you're a public representative, people will throw things at you and you think, oh my god, that's a terrible way of thinking of it, or that's wrong. But then you realize, well, you represent them and you have to take their opinion into play, and it may completely jar with yours, but it is still an opinion, and it's still a valid opinion. You may not think it's right, but it is something that we need to respect. And this comes back to, I guess, my point in relation to polarization. I always put down the fact that there is so much divisiveness, and like the polarization and views isn't the issue. It's that people are so entrenched in them, and that becomes then the division. There is no medium ground whatsoever. And there are things that people throw at me where I go, yeah, I can't find a medium ground of that. There's no way I can call your racist abuse and think I'm happy to compromise it. But there is a way to then go, well, you're not right, and I don't think your views are right, but you are entitled to it. So you are entitled to it, and I don't have to accept it, but I have to accept the fact that you are entitled to that view, and I will work to change your view, but I may not always be able to. And it becomes very hard work, because some people you just can't. You feel like you can't meet in the middle, but it's the attempt of meeting them in the middle, I think, is the important part. Because I think if you don't attempt to, what will happen is you will become more on one side and they will become more on one side, and there is absolutely no way then you can ever even try to reach a middle ground. And also, a lot of times it's not getting that person, but it's getting the person that they're bringing in along that might see reason or see the compromise, and at least then, well, you're able to change some people's mind, if not the initial.
I really want to ask you a question as a woman of color. coming in Europe, and I found as a community leader, as a activist, this is so much complicated because there's always expectation from the host community. You have already your limited approach. They ask you, you can go on this kind of high level. You can't go up there. You've been invited as a speaker to talk about your story. You have been invited to talk about your experience working in a diversity, but that's it. You are not asking to give advice or expertise. Like, I just want to, sorry, I'm taking a little bit time, but I really want to share my experience. I am here as a refugee in Netherlands, but I was not given a right to vote. I'm not have that much approach to give the visibility of political engagement. But if I go and if I have to pay 100% equal tax, so this is that barrier we are facing. They do not give us rights, political rights. I mean, but they do have expectation, which is very high. So, what do you think about it? How we can say something against this approach towards migrant and refugee in Europe?
And this may not be an answer you want to hear, but there is an element of managing expectations, managing your own expectations as well. I think for me, I always thought, well, you know what, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to demand everything, and I'm going to make sure I get everything on the table. And absolutely, that should be in the back of your mind. But when, and this is the cynical, maybe it's me being cynical to the overall political game. It is what I say in my last answer, or answer before last. It's a long-term strategy and it's a long-term game. So, and you need a lot of patience for it, and you need and you also need a lot of energy for it as well. I have known so many amazing activists that have gone in with the best will in the world and the best charge, and then become burnt out very quickly because they are not receiving what they think is the right, it should be done. And I most of the time feel so bad for them, mainly because I know I know that if they had adopted another strategy, then there is a longer term gain there, and they may achieve the results in the long run. And my mother always gives out to me about this, because she always thinks, you're so slow at doing something, Hazel. Like, I ask you to do something and it takes you like 6 months or something like that. Or she always goes, why? And this is the thing, she's immigrant over here, and she has seen how things work. But even with me, because I'm now in the Lord Mayor's office, she always goes, why can't you do this immediately? Or why can't you change this? And the thing is, sometimes change takes a long time, and that's not an excuse. There are some changes that looks like they happen overnight. I guess a good example I would give is repeal in Ireland, which is the repealing the 8th Amendment so that women have the right to abortions. That everyone thought happened overnight, because it was a campaign, and then there was the referendum, and then there was huge celebrations. That campaign had been going on since 1980s, or actually maybe longer. And some of the women that had been campaigning since their 30s, and now they were in their 50s. And this is the thing. And I know this may not be the answer you want, but it unfortunately sometimes it does take time. I'm not saying don't push. I'm saying push when you feel like you're not being heard, or when you feel like you are not provided that seat at the table. Make sure you push and have sharp elbows. But what I'm saying is, sometimes it's not because people don't want to hear it, it's they're not at the stage yet where they are hearing it, and that then involves repeating and repeating and repeating, and it's exhausting. But that is what it takes sometimes.
So I saved one of the best questions for last from Pawasha from Greece. One word answer. As a politician, what's one thing that you want to see deleted from politics? So if over your career, if you could, one word, what one thing that you want to get rid of and change?
Discrimination. Discrimination, like across the board. So
Okay. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, for giving us your time